Higher Universe Pictures.
Welcome to the Paranormal Phenomena Podcast with Brandon Reines and Elizabeth Chamberlain.
I'm Brandon Reines.
And I'm Elizabeth Chamberlain.
Welcome to the Paranormal Phenomena Podcast, where we talk about ghosts, aliens, and the unexplained. On today's episode, we welcome back paranormal expert Morgan Knudsen to talk about Ouija boards and tarot cards.
If you like our podcast, be sure to subscribe, and we'd love it if you could like, share, and comment on our show. Those likes go a long way in helping us reach a wider audience, and we really appreciate that.
All right, Morgan, thank you for coming back on the show for a third time.
I'm glad to be here, and as always, and I'm looking forward to this discussion because this is always, I think, something people have a million questions about.
So there are a lot of horror movies that begin with someone playing Ouija board and inviting some sort of evil into their lives. So how accurate is that? And should people be worried about playing with Ouija boards?
I think the Ouija board is like one of the most misunderstood things on the planet. It's so funny because, like you're so right. All the movies and, horror film, everything always starts off with, somebody playing with the Ouija board and all these terrible things start to happen. And there's a lot of cases, like I've been doing this for 20 years. And there's a lot of cases where, people automatically attribute their haunting back to a Ouija board experience or something like that. And I think what people fail to realize is that the Ouija board is a tool. It's a tool. It's a tool in the same way that electronic voice phenomena is a tool. That and just channeling is a tool. It's a form of channeling, really, is what it is. And there's different aspects in cultures all over the world. The I Ching is an example of that. But I think what people don't realize is that the spirit world and just the world in general around us responds to our emotional state. So when we enter into an activity, especially when we're talking about the paranormal or anything like that, we are always, the universe is so responsive. It gives us exactly what we are emanating. It's almost like karma in a way, where what we're giving out emotionally, vibrationally, what we've got unhealed, what we have healed, all of that is going to come back to us. So most people, when they pick up a Ouija board, they're either looking to be scared, they're in grief because they're missing a loved one and they're looking for that loved one, but they're looking from the perspective of being sad and missing them. They're looking to be they're frightened or nervous. So immediately you're going to get back what you put out. And I think the majority of people who are tackling things like the Ouija board or EVP or anything like that, they're not mindful of that. And if they're going to have a bad encounter, it's not because of the board. It's just because they've got this vibration going on that's just not serving them.
Maybe just to get back to basics, I'm sure everyone knows what a Ouija board is who's listening to the show, but just in case, can you explain what it is and what it looks like and how it works?
Yeah, so the Ouija board has been around for ages. I can't remember who patented it in the toy world. It's Hasbro or something like that. But they basically, the idea was back in the Victorian days, and even prior to that, it was a board, and it had the entire alphabet. It had yes, no, and hello and goodbye. And it was a combination of both French and German, the words for yes, Ouija. So it essentially translates into a yes board. And you take a planchette, or sometimes people use a glass, anything that can kind of roll around that board easily. And everybody typically puts their tips of their fingers on it, focuses on a question, focuses on a person, and they ask a question, and then it starts to move seemingly on its own. So there's of course a lot of controversy about that and how it works. But there's this, what's interesting to me, putting aside the cases of just pure suggestion and our sympathetic nervous system moving the planchette around, because it will. I myself personally have had some really interesting things happen with things like Ouija board or glass table tipping, that kind of thing, that I've found unexplainable. So those are the instances that interest me. And it's said to either conjure a spirit or connect with a spirit, or in the case of the Philip experiment, which we can talk about a little later, actually the focus around a Ouija board will create the spirit. So it's, yeah, really interesting, but multi-purpose tool.
So I guess one question would be, if you're doing this with more than one person and it's supposed to be your subconscious controlling the planchette, how could multiple people, how come they're not all pushing it in a different direction?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of questions with it. Sometimes it's just one person that starts to to subconsciously push on it or something like that. A good example of this is a pendulum, which I see a lot of psychics and things like that try using. And basically the pendulum is essentially a chain or necklace with some sort of a pendant or crystal or something like that on the end. And they'll be holding the thing perfectly still, and you guys can try this. The people at home here that are watching the interview can try this as well, because it will work for you. Is to turn around and have it hanging as still as possible, and just focus your mind on getting it to spin, say, in a clockwise direction. And lo and behold, you're going to see this damn thing spin in a clockwise direction. What gets weirder is that when you start to focus in the other direction, you're actually going to start to see this thing stop and turn in the other direction. And it blows people's minds. They think it has to be something paranormal. But in fact, what's happening is the sympathetic nervous system, the little nerves in your fingers, are actually responding to this and creating movement. It's really amazing. So that's part of, I think, what's going on with some instances of the Ouija. However, I know myself and my partner, business partner at the time, Stephanie Wirtz, who founded Entity Seeker with me, we spent a lot of time, years, playing around with this concept to see what was possible, what was going on. And I mean, we had stuff go on that is, to me, is unexplainable. Where we had controlled experiments set up, and I mean, this thing was moving, and it shouldn't have been. So I think there's definitely more to it. But anytime we get a situation where you are focused and plugged in to an event or something happening or communicating with non-physical, it's going to respond. At some point it's going to respond, and I think that can happen through things like the Ouija.
So say you were like, what would be the difference using the Ouija board versus not using a tool, just sitting in a room and calling out to spirits, trying to talk to them? Is that the same thing, or could it lead to the same results?
I think ultimately it does. I mean, I think our state of expectation heightens when we're sitting in front of something like the Ouija board, because we're expecting some sort of physical answer, a very specific physical answer. We're expecting the planchette or whatever to move. So I think, but ultimately, whenever you're engaging with non-physical, with source, with spirit, with whatever you want to call it, I don't think a tool is required, but I do think it helps our level of focus into something. And that's even the purpose of ritual, for instance, is we can meditate without herbs and spices, but being able to sit down and focus and do something and move something with our hands and whatnot, it's a really, really powerful thing. So I think it really helps our human focus to sort of plug into something physical.
Why is it that Ouija boards are considered like dangerous and evil or whatnot if like prayer is considered good and wholesome and normal?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I run into this so much, where automatically people will shut down the idea of Ouija being evil. And I think a lot of that is driven by the media and the way it's been portrayed in film. We even look at a movie like The Exorcist, right? And Reagan, the little girl in the movie, one of the ways she ended up beginning her communication with this entity was through the Ouija board. She was upset. She was missing her dad. And lo and behold, she ends up, finding this Ouija board in the basement and ends up, talking with this negative entity. And so I think a lot of it is how it's perceived. And I think a lot of it, again, is how people go into these experiences. People that, usually don't pick up the Ouija board thinking, I want to have a really happy connection with somebody I love. They're thinking, I'm going to have this really spooky thing happen to me. And then bam, they do. And they automatically attribute it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned The Exorcist too, because I was actually just reading today they're saying in the, kind of World War One, early 1900s, almost every household had a Ouija board. It was like it sold more than Monopoly, and it was kind of like having a chessboard.
Oh,
Everyone
wow.
had one. And once the Exorcist movie came out, it annihilated all sales of it. Basically, most people got rid of their boards, and they were no longer sold. It just all of a sudden that movie just caused a cultural switch that no one will touch the things anymore.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of too bad because when we look back into like the Victorian seances and things like that, it was so cool because everybody had this really optimistic vision of being able to talk to spirits and to be able to communicate with non-physical energy, and they wanted this relationship, and then yeah, and like the media and the movies and whatnot came out, and then automatically bam, it just becomes something that's terrible and evil and shouldn't be talked about. And I think it brought back a lot of cultural issues because you go back into various even religions and things like that, where I mean it is considered taboo. You don't talk to non-physical energy. That's a bad thing to do. It's taboo. So I think it brought some of that back as well, where it was just okay, well that is evil, so we don't want to do that. But I mean I think any tool that's used in a proper way, when we're feeling good, when we're feeling positive, we're feeling joyful, when we sit down and want to talk with somebody who's passed over, people that we're missing, or and be able to have that relationship again. If you do that through the Ouija board, cool. There's lots of fantastic encounters and reports of people having like amazing conversations this way. And so yeah, it's too bad that the media is kind of nixed it.
It's funny, I was reading today too, apparently they used to come with rules. There was a bunch of rules and there was a warning. Of course, most people, they're excited about using it. They just figure it out like most people do with board games. But apparently the three of the rules that I found interesting were: don't ask when you're going to die, never play alone, and never talk about God. Those were the three of the things that if you don't follow those rules, you're in for a whole lot of trouble.
Interesting.
Huh.
Another thing I found
It
interesting.
sounds like the rules over a bad family dinner.
Yeah, it does.
We talk about politics or religion. Yeah.
Yeah, don't discuss these things. You discuss these things, it's all gonna go to shit. So don't do that. Yeah.
What I also found interesting, I can't verify if it's true, but I read, I'm just reading about Ouija boards. Apparently the guy who founded Alcoholics Anonymous claims that the 12 steps, he claims he got them through a Ouija board while talking to a 15th century monk named Boniface, which I found very freaking bizarre.
Yeah,
That is so bizarre.
It's interesting though, because you look at at something like the 12 steps, and the concepts are at least some of the concepts very, very universal to a lot of the messaging that people that do channel and whatnot get. Things like be able to turn things over to source, whatever it is for you. Often they use the word God or whatever, but to be able to to surrender, to give over, to forgive yourself before you forgive others, all of those things, even that there's like how to heal, how to bring healing about. So it's really interesting because, and it doesn't surprise me that many of those came from something like the Ouija board, because it's messages that we hear all the time repeated.
Yeah, I just find it's funny that I've never used a Ouija board, and I'm more of a skeptic. I tend not to believe all that negative stuff. But to be honest, if someone was using one in my house, I'd be like, like take it outside. I just for some reason I would just err on the side of caution. Maybe it's just because of being a horror movie fan. I would just not want that, because I would just be up all night worried that some weird shit's gonna happen. But I guess that just shows like how, like growing up, just having religious friends and that kind of thing, and that was like the big thing. Like never touch a Ouija board. You do, your house is going to be haunted, you're going to be possessed, someone's going to die, it's going to be horrible. And there's so many horror movies. It's like, seems like half of them, that's how it starts. Just playing with the Ouija board, and it leads, it's just an easy excuse to, why is the house haunted? Kid was playing with Ouija board, now the house is haunted. It's like a catch-all explanation for anything paranormal.
Yeah, and it is. And and I think in that sense too, that can be a real negative as well, because again, it puts the onus on this external thing. And I think that can be a problem when we're talking about hauntings, because in my experience, there's always a root cause to something that's going on, some sort of dysfunction in the family, or dysfunction with a person that is attracting what they're experiencing into their environment. So, I mean, as soon as I think people can, if they can put the blame on something, then it becomes, about that thing, and then they don't have to look at what they're doing. They don't have to look at themselves, which it's a thing. It's a problem. When you've got people who automatically want to sort of look at the squeaky wheel and think, okay, well, that must be what's going on. And I know there's so many people that will turn around and say, oh, just go burn the board, and you've got to create some ritual to burn the board and this, that, and the other thing. And I mean, and then 2 months later, the activity's back and they can't figure out what's going on. But it really does sort of take the onus off of us looking at our own stuff. And I think with anytime that we're dealing with sort of that external influence or that external tool, I think we run the risk of putting the blame where it doesn't necessarily belong. Not that there's blame, but putting the onus, I guess, on something else that's not fixing the core root of the problem.
I hear that happens a lot with like tarot card readers and psychics and stuff like that. People think that they're dangerous, or going to see them is going to start some sort of activity in their life or whatnot. I don't know. I just think that's so wrong. Like that's not what their job is. They're not trying to mess your life up.
No, and it's funny, actually, I just wrote an article for Haunted Magazine that just came out here in this last issue, and it was on people's addictions to psychics and fortune telling and stuff like that. And I don't think it's going to cause some horrible thing to happen in your experience. I mean, Stephanie and I did quite extensive work with tarot and experimenting with tarot and things like that, with some really interesting results. We've had some pretty cool stuff happen. But definitely never anything negative showed up, or anything negative happened to us or anything like that. I think ultimately, funny enough, like where the danger with a lot of these, these psychics that you go to and pay money to and this kind of thing, is more the manipulation or the con artistry that can go on underneath of it. It's not necessarily that they're going to, something bad is going to curse you. I think the worry is they're going to turn around and tell you you're cursed, and then you walk away believing it, or you walk away believing that they're the only person that can fix it, and things like that. That's to me where the danger is. But do I think that I don't think people can negatively assert paranormal activity onto other people. I've never seen it happen.
It's funny too about the tarot cards. Like I heard even just the cards themselves had an evil to them. Even regular playing cards. I remember I was probably 8 years old or something in summer camp, and our camp counselor in our cabin was like super religious, and someone left like a deck of cards out, and he just freaked out, and he's like, if you leave a deck of cards out, like the devil will appear. And of course, as kids, we were like, we went and like, threw them out. And honestly, for years after that, I was always kind of scared to sleep next to a deck of cards, just because probably not real, but why take a chance? But I've heard that about tarot cards too, that if you just have them in your house, you're inviting evil in.
Well, I think anything, especially during the early time periods, anything that was giving people a mode of empowerment was really looked down upon. So anything like future telling, or beginning to forecast or give somebody the power of creating their own reality, and then on top of it having these people that were really good at focusing and then having those realities happen, I think freaked a lot of people out. So I think they got the rap ultimately that a lot of this stuff, I'd say, like the I Ching, like the tarot, like all of these different methodologies, were somehow evil, or it was going to destroy your life or whatever. But interestingly enough, what I find fascinating is that you look back on all of these things, and it was always something that put the person, that either put the person themselves in control of looking at their future, or, as I say, where the danger comes in for me is where people begin to believe or rely on this, all of these external pieces of information that is going to determine their reality and what they move forward and create. So it's it's a catch-22, but I think originally the label of evil for a lot of these things was latched onto because it just didn't serve the higher powers at the time in politics and church and that kind of thing.
So how much credit do you give the Ouija board tarot cards? Like, how much power do they have? Like, can I predict who's going to win a hockey game by using a Ouija board? Like how much power do they actually have?
Well, you know what? I don't think it's anything that's in the board or in the cards or anything like that. I think these are strictly tools for our own ability to focus. And what's interesting to me is that when Stephanie and I were doing our experiments with the tarot, because we always thought this was ridiculous, and what we found really intriguing, where we found the common denominator was we would deliberately get ourselves into a certain emotional state. Like we would deliberately get ourselves, say for example, into a depressive state. And what was interesting was that when we turn around and lay out a card spread, every single card that came up reflected the negative state that we were in. It was people were going to die, we were going to lose our jobs, we were going to, it was awful. It was awful. But what was interesting was that when we flipped that, we ended up with the most positive thing you'd ever want to get out. So our expectations definitely seem to be playing a role. And when a number of years back, when we were experimenting, a friend of mine and I were experimenting with cartomancy, which is what you were talking about with the playing cards, and using playing cards as a prediction. We had some really intriguing things happen. We would literally shuffle the hell out of these decks, and we would end up laying out say, I don't know, 8 cards in a spread or something like that, whatever. And every single damn time we would end up with the same spread and asking the same question, ending up with the same spread. And it got to the point where it was beyond coincidence. It was weird. And I'm not claiming it was necessarily supernatural, I don't think, but there was something going on. And it was enough that definitely caught my attention because it was becoming just beyond coincidence, beyond probability. And so there was something going on, and oftentimes they were damn accurate, and very specifically so. Cartomancy can be even more accurate than tarot, which is interesting considering it's playing cards. But we definitely had some unique things happen that I definitely can't necessarily explain, other than here we are again coming back to the idea that our state of expectation and our that emotional state is determining what cards are getting turned over just via law of attraction. But it was really interesting. So there's definitely some of the stuff that I don't have explanation for.
I was raised in my Catholic upbringing that I was told that things like this we weren't allowed to do because it gave us too much power. It was too powerful, and that we shouldn't test the power of God. We shouldn't want to be as powerful as God. And that's what I was told. So it's interesting that you just talked about how the power doesn't come from the tool, it comes from yourself. And yeah, I always disagreed with that personally. I always thought, if we have the ability to do this power, wasn't it given to us by God then? And shouldn't we therefore try it?
I think you're making such a brilliant point, because I think that idea of us connecting with non-physical in whatever way has been so demonized, but in so many ways by so many different factions and people and whatever. And we are meant for this. We are meant to have that connection with source, with intelligences, with spirits, all of that. And it's not going to come through a specific psychic. It's not necessarily, sometimes it does, but I mean, not necessarily. And we are all meant to be able to do this. We're hardwired for this. And, you know, the more we're able to quiet our minds, the more we're able to have that connection, the better life gets. So, I mean, you know, it's always bothered me when, you know, I hear people saying, cut that off, or, don't talk about that, or, don't connect with that, it's evil, or, whatever. And it's like, I think people miss out so often, not only on connecting with those who have passed over, and they can rebuild that relationship and keep that connection going, but they also miss out on a deeper sense of who they are. They miss out on the fact that, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And if we're knocking ourselves off and cutting ourselves off from that which is the source energy around us, it's sure as hell not going to be as much fun as it would be, if we allowed ourselves that connection and a deeper understanding of who we are.
It's funny that, I don't know if it's just kind of like the religious leaders, they seem to be kind of the source of all of this. I mean, even even when I was younger, Dungeons and Dragons was like a big no-no. I even had a buddy whose older sister worked in a bookstore, and she was like lobbying them to get rid of all their Dungeons and Dragons stuff, because it just, invites Satan into your life. And
What? Oh
just
gosh.
and even just heavy metal music and things like that are now played on classic rock stations, and AC/DC, it's conjures up the devil. And it just seems like, yeah, it's just religious leaders that are trying to poke their way to people's lives and taking harmless things and making it evil, when, to be quite honest, the things they're doing are a million times more horrible.
Well, I mean, you look at even today with the banning of Harry Potter in so many bookstores and things like that. The big outrage was of Harry Potter. One of the funnier ones to me was when Marilyn Manson's Mechanical Animals came out, and the character on the front of the album was actually depicting an angel with the 6 fingers and the sort of hermaphroditic form and whatever, and yet it was straight out of the Bible. And immediately they banned it because it was evil. And it was just like, just mind blowing to me. But yeah, it's a convenient excuse for, I think, a lot of people who are feeling, and not just religious people, but people who are feeling that level of disempowerment over whatever it is. They don't know how to label it. They don't know how to deal with it. And their instinct is to lash out at it. And if they slap a label on it of evil, not only does it make that thing wrong, it makes them more righteous for saying, I don't like this. It's not that I don't understand this, it's that I'm better than the people who think that I am, that this is a good thing. So it not only puts them in a position of, I don't have to like this, but it puts them in a position of, or I don't have to understand this. It puts them in a position of, I'm more right than you. And it's a dangerous spot to be in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, honestly, I could talk forever about this. Just being someone that's into horror movies and heavy metal and all these things that have been, historically maligned, and it just angers me to no end that people just ban something, not because I could see banning something that's racist, banning things that deserve to be banned, but banning something that's completely innocent for stupid religious reasons like that. There's nothing wrong with Harry Potter being a magician. I can sometimes understand opposing viewpoints on different topics, but that one I don't get. But it's just like, it's dealing with warriors and dragons and wizards, therefore it is evil, satanic, and should be banned, and people should be punished for reading it or owning it. I don't know. Seems like there's a gap in the logic there.
Interestingly enough, with things like Dungeons and Dragons and whatever, usually or oftentimes these things are banned if they're creating a group of people that are getting together, which is always intriguing as well. Promoting conversation and discussion of topics, and as soon as that comes into play, automatically, bam, all of a sudden you see it disbanded. It's interesting. It's a pervasive pattern.
So therefore, swinging back to Ouija boards, if Ouija boards aren't inherently evil, should everybody try them?
You know what? I think anybody who's interested in connecting with non-physical, as long as you're doing it from a place of joy, that's the big rule. It doesn't matter what you're using, but you got to do it from a place of joy. You can't do it from a place of fear or grief or upset or or frightened place. You can't do it from that point. You have to do it from a place of joy, of peace, of contentment, of happiness. And from that perspective, I think everybody should be in touch with non-physical, whatever methodology that they choose. I think it's a crucial part in understanding of who we are, and they want to talk. So we got to listen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe we could wrap it up there. We only got a couple minutes left. That was a very interesting conversation.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Paranormal Phenomena Podcast. See you next time.